My daughter-in-law laughed at my garden and handed me a spectator ticket for the back row of the upcoming flower show. She bragged that her expensive display was guaranteed to win the gold medal. She had no idea that I was the anonymous head judge who would decide her fate. I pushed my trowel into the dark, cool soil. The smell of damp earth and crushed mint rose up to meet me. It was a scent that always grounded me. To anyone driving past my house in Carlsbad, my front yard probably looked like a chaotic explosion of green and brown. I knew what they saw. They saw tall, spindly stalks swaying in the wind. They saw bushes that grew wide and wild instead of being trimmed into perfect, tight little spheres. But I saw a system. I brushed a bit of dirt from the root of a California lilac. A fat bumblebee buzzed right past my ear and landed on a cluster of purple flowers. I watched it work for a moment. This garden was alive. It fed the birds, the bees, and the soil itself. It was not neat, but it was healthy. The sound of a car engine broke my concentration. It was a low, expensive hum that I recognized immediately. A sleek white SUV pulled into my driveway. The tires crunched loudly on the gravel. I sighed and wiped my hands on my canvas apron. I stood up slowly. My knees popped, a familiar sound that marked my 72 years. Tiffany stepped out of the car. My daughter-in-law looked like she had just walked out of a magazine photo shoot. She wore a beige linen jumpsuit that looked incredibly easily to stain. Her sunglasses were oversized, hiding half her face, and her heels clicked sharply on the paved walkway leading to my porch. "Hi, Evelyn," she called out. She didn't walk onto the grass. She stayed strictly on the concrete path. "Hello, Tiffany," I said. I walked over to meet her, taking off my gardening gloves. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" She lowered her sunglasses and looked around the yard. Her nose wrinkled slightly. It was a small movement, but I caught it. She looked at my patch of native milkweed as if it were a pile of trash. "I was just in the neighborhood meeting with my florist," she said. "I thought I'd stop by. Though honestly, Evelyn, I don't know how you stand all this mess." I followed her gaze to the milkweed. "It's not a mess, Tiffany. It's habitat. The monarchs will be migrating soon. They need a place to lay their eggs." Tiffany waved her hand in front of her face, shooing away a small gnat. "It looks overgrown. Honestly, Mark and I were talking about it just the other day. It really drags down the curb appeal. You know, if you ever wanted to sell, you'd have to bulldoze all of this." "I have no intention of selling," I said calmly. "Would you like some iced tea? I made a pitcher this morning." She checked her watch. "Just a quick glass. I have a schedule to keep." We sat on the front porch. I poured the tea into 2 tall glasses. The ice clinked against the glass, a sharp sound in the afternoon heat. Tiffany took a sip and set the glass down on a coaster immediately to avoid condensation rings. "So," she started, leaning back in the wicker chair, "the Carlsbad flower show is next week. Can you believe it? 50 years. I took a sip of my tea. The lemon tasted tart and fresh. "I am aware. It is a big milestone for the society." Tiffany sat up straighter. Her eyes lit up, but not with joy. It was the shine of ambition. "Well, my entry is going to be the highlight this year. I've been working on it for months. It's going to be a modern minimalist Zen paradise. Very clean lines. Very high-end. None of this." She gestured vaguely at my yard again. "None of this chaos." I nodded slowly. "That sounds very structured." "It is," she said. "I'm importing some incredibly rare white orchids. And I found this amazing moss that looks like velvet. It's going to be flawless. I have over 50,000 followers on my blog now, Evelyn. They expect perfection. When I win that gold medal, it's going to launch my brand to the next level." She spoke about the plants as if they were furniture. Accessories to be arranged and then discarded. She didn't mention the soil requirements for the orchids. She didn't mention the humidity needs for the moss. "I am sure it will be striking," I said. Tiffany reached into her oversized designer bag. She pulled out a glossy paper ticket. "I actually brought you this," she said, sliding it across the table toward me. "It's a spectator pass for the show. I know tickets are sold out, but I pulled some strings. It's not in the VIP section, obviously, those are for sponsors and press. But it's a seat. It's in the back, near the exit, so you won't have to walk far if you get tired." I looked at the ticket. It was a general admission pass. "You should come," she continued, her voice taking on a tone that sounded almost like pity. It might be good for you to see what modern gardening looks like. Update your tastes a little bit. Get some inspiration to clean up this situation. She pointed a manicured fingernail at my sprawling rosemary bush. I picked up the ticket. I felt the smooth texture of the paper. Thank you, Tiffany, I said. But I won't be needing this. She blinked. What? Why? It's the biggest event of the year. Don't be stubborn, Evelyn. You never go out anymore. I have plans to attend, I said simply. I slid the ticket back across the table to her. Give this to someone else. Perhaps one of your followers. Tiffany scoffed and snatched the ticket back. She shoved it into her bag. Fine. Suit yourself. I just thought you'd want to see me win. But if you'd rather stay here in the dirt, that's your choice. She stood up, brushing imaginary dust off her lap. I have to go. My contractor is meeting me at the venue in 20 minutes. We have to set up the irrigation system for the display. Drive safely, I said. I watched her walk back to her car. She didn't look back. She got in, and the white SUV backed out of the driveway, leaving a cloud of exhaust that drifted over my sage bushes. I sat on the porch for a long time after she left. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the yard. The bees were starting to return to their hives. I finished my tea, the ice now melted and watery. I stood up and walked into the house. It was cool and quiet inside. I walked to the small oak desk in the corner of my living room. I opened the bottom drawer. Inside, resting on a velvet pad, was a heavy rectangular badge. It was gold and green. The engraving was deep and precise. Head Judge, 50th Annual Carlsbad Flower Show. I ran my thumb over the letters. I hadn't told my son. I hadn't told Tiffany. The committee had asked for anonymity to prevent bribery and bias. They wanted the iron trowel to return, unbiased and unseen until the final moment. I closed the drawer. The click of the latch sounded loud in the empty room. I looked out the window at my wild living garden. Tiffany was right about one thing. She was going to learn a lot about gardening next week. The exhibition hall at the Carlsbad Convention Center smelled of cedar mulch and stale coffee. The air was thick and humid. Massive industrial fans hummed near the ceiling, but they did little to cool the room. Thousands of plants released moisture into the air, and the heat from the display lights trapped it there. I walked through the double doors at the rear of the hall. I wore my gray wool coat and a simple silk scarf. My official judge's badge was inside my purse, clipped to the lining where no one could see it. The committee rules were strict. The head judge remained anonymous until the final walkthrough at noon. Until then, I was just another face in the crowd. I moved slowly down the first aisle. To my left, a display of bonsai trees sat on wooden pedestals. I paused to look at a juniper. The wiring on the branches was clean, but the moss at the base was brown. The owner had let it dry out under the convention lights. I made a mental note of the display number, 104, and continued walking. The noise in the hall increased as I got closer to the center. People shouted instructions to forklift drivers. Drills whirred as crews assembled final backdrops. The floor was a maze of extension cords and plastic tarps. I saw Tiffany's display before I saw Tiffany. It took up a prime corner spot near the main stage. A large banner hung above it. Modern Minimalists in Paradise by Tiffany Rosewood. I stopped 10 feet away, standing behind a large potted palm to observe. The display was striking, I had to admit. She had built a raised platform covered in white gravel. 3 large black rectangular planters sat in the center. They held tall architectural stalks of bamboo and white orchids. Behind the planters, a wall of green foliage acted as a backdrop. Tiffany stood in the center of the white gravel. She wore a white dress that matched the stones. A photographer crouched in front of her, snapping photos rapidly. "Chin up, Tiffany," the photographer said. "Look at the orchids. Touch the petals." "Good." Tiffany reached out and touched one of the white blooms. She smiled a practiced, stiff smile. "Make sure you get the branding in the shot," Tiffany said, pointing to a small sign that listed her social media handle. "I need this to go up before the judging starts." I stepped closer. I wanted to see the plants, not the pose. The white orchids were tall, too tall for the pot size. I looked at the leaves. They were thick and waxy. Too shiny. I squinted. Real orchids have a subtle matte texture to their leaves. These reflected the overhead lights like plastic. Then I looked at the backdrop. It was a lush wall of dark green vines. My stomach tightened. The leaves were triangular with light veins. Heterohelix. English ivy. I walked around the perimeter of her booth. A young man in a black polo shirt was sweeping stray pieces of gravel off the convention floor. He looked tired. "Excuse me," I said to him. He looked up, leaning on his broom. "Yeah. Is that English ivy on the back wall?" I asked, pointing to the green backdrop. He shrugged. "I don't know plant names, lady. I just built the frame. Ms. Rosewood ordered a bunch of flats of it online. Said it grew fast and covered the wood cheap." I nodded. "Thank you." English ivy was a Class C invasive species in our region. The competition rulebook on page 4 explicitly stated that no invasive species were permitted in any category. It was grounds for immediate point deduction and often disqualification. I walked back toward the front of the display. Tiffany was taking a break from the photos. She held a bottle of water and was talking to a woman with a press badge. "So, who are the judges this year?" the reporter asked, holding a voice recorder. Tiffany took a sip of water. "Oh, the usual local garden club types, I assume. Though there is a rumor about a mystery head judge. Some expert they brought out of retirement. They call her the Iron Trowel, or something dramatic like that." Tiffany laughed. It was a sharp, dismissive sound. "Honestly, it doesn't matter who judges. Look at this setup. It costs more than most people's entire gardens. Aesthetics are universal. When they see the clean lines, they won't have a choice but to give me the gold." The reporter nodded, scribbling notes. "And the inspiration? It's about control," Tiffany said. "Nature is messy. True design is about dominating that mess and making it clean. That's what I do." I tightened my grip on the strap of my purse. Dominating the mess. I stepped out from behind the palm tree and walked toward the edge of her display. My shoe scuffed on the concrete floor. Tiffany looked over. Her smile dropped instantly. "Evelyn," she said. She lowered her water bottle. "What are you doing here? I thought you weren't coming." "I decided to take a look around," I said. I kept my voice even. Tiffany walked to the edge of the white gravel. She didn't step off it. She loomed over me slightly from the raised platform. "Well, you can't stand there," she said, lowering her voice so the reporter wouldn't hear. "You're in the background of the wide shot. We're doing a video tour in 5 minutes." "I was just admiring the ivy," I said. "It's lush, isn't it?" Tiffany said, glancing back at the wall. "It fills the space perfectly. Now seriously, Evelyn. The spectator seating is over by the food court. You look out of place here. This area is for exhibitors and press." She looked at my gray coat and sensible shoes. She looked at her own designer dress. "Please," she hissed. "Go find a seat. I don't have time to babysit you. I have to win a medal." I looked at her for a long moment. I looked at the invasive vines choking the wooden frame. I looked at the shiny, perfect orchids. "Good luck, Tiffany," I said. "I don't need luck," she replied, turning her back to me to face the camera again. "I have taste." I turned and walked away. I headed toward the judges' chambers behind the main stage. The weight of the badge in my purse felt heavier now. The time for observation was over. It was almost noon. The judges' chambers was a small, windowless conference room behind the main stage. It was quiet in there. The roar of the crowd was just a dull vibration in the floorboards. A pot of coffee sat on a side table, burning and acrid. I sat at the head of the long table. 3 other judges sat across from me. There was Marcus, a landscape architect from San Diego with thick glasses. There was Sarah, a botanist from the university who specialized in succulents. And there was Dr. Halloway, the former president of the Orchid Society. They all looked at me. They didn't speak. They waited. I opened the leather folder in front of me. Inside were the scorecards. The paper was thick and cream-colored. "The rules are clear," I said. My voice was soft, but it carried in the small room. "We judge on 3 criteria: plant health, design integrity, and adherence to the category rules. There are no points for popularity. There are no points for expensive hardscaping." Marcus nodded. He tapped his pen on the table. There is a lot of chatter about the rosewood display, the Zen paradise. It has a crowd 3 people deep. We do not judge the crowd, I said. We judge the plants. I stood up. The other 3 stood up immediately after me. It is time, I said. Formation, please. This was the tradition for the head judge walkthrough. To maintain anonymity until the final ceremony, the supporting judges and stewards surrounded the head judge. We moved as a block. It prevented exhibitors from directing their appeals to the person in charge. We walked out of the quiet room and into the noise of the convention hall. The light hit us first. It was bright and hot. Then the sound hit us, thousands of people talking, laughing, and shouting over the PA system. As our group moved onto the main floor, the noise around us dropped. People stopped talking. They turned to watch the dark clump of judges moving down the aisle. I walked in the center. Marcus walked in front of me. Sarah and Dr. Holloway walked on my sides. 2 stewards in yellow vests walked behind us. I was visible only in glimpses. We stopped at display number 104, the bonsai collection. I stepped forward into the gap. The exhibitor, an older man with shaky hands, stood at attention. I leaned in close to the juniper. I touched the soil. It was bone dry. I looked at the needles. They were brittle. I made a mark on my scorecard. I didn't look at the man. I stepped back into the protective circle. We moved on. We worked our way down the rows. I saw everything. I saw rose bushes with black spot fungus hidden on the lower leaves. I saw expensive tulips that had been forced open with heat lamps, their petals loose and ready to fall. I saw a sustainable garden that used plastic turf instead of clover. My pen scratched against the paper. It was the only sound I focused on. Finally, we turned the corner toward the main stage. Tiffany's display was ahead. The crowd was thick here. People held up phones to take videos. I could see the white gravel shining under the spotlights. We stopped about 20 feet away to discuss the previous entry. The circle of judges opened slightly. I stepped out to clean my glasses. I pulled a microfiber cloth from my pocket and wiped the lenses. That was when Tiffany saw me. She was standing by the velvet rope that separated her display from the public aisle. She was fixing her hair in the reflection of a black planter. She looked up and froze. Her eyes darted to the judges standing near me. Then she looked back at me. She didn't see the badge. My coat covered it. She only saw her mother-in-law standing uncomfortably close to the official judging delegation. She ducked under the velvet rope and speed-walked toward me. Her heels clicked frantically on the concrete. She stopped 2 feet away. She didn't yell. She whispered, but the sound was sharp and hissed through her teeth. "Evelyn," she said. Her eyes were wide. "What are you doing?" "I told you to go to the seating area." I put my glasses back on. The world came back into sharp focus. I saw the sweat trapped in the foundation on her forehead. "I am looking at the displays," I said. She grabbed my upper arm. Her grip was tight. Her fingernails dug into the wool of my coat. "You are standing right next to the judges," she hissed. "They are about to come to my booth. You look lost. You look like a confused old woman who wandered out of the restroom line. You are embarrassing me." I looked down at her hand on my arm. I didn't pull away. I just looked at it. "The judges are working, Tiffany," I said. "Exactly," she said. "So move. Go. Get away from them before they think I'm related to this." She gestured up and down at my sensible gray coat. "If you ruin my aesthetic with your presence, I will never forgive you. Go wait in the car if you have to." She gave my arm a little shove. It wasn't violent, but it was dismissive. It was a shove you would give to a piece of furniture that was in the way. "Excuse me," a voice said from behind me. It was Marcus. He stepped forward. He looked at Tiffany's hand on my arm. Then he looked at Tiffany. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" Marcus asked. Tiffany let go of my arm instantly. She smoothed her dress and flashed a bright, fake smile at Marcus. No problem at all," she said, her voice pitching up an octave. "Just giving directions to a lost spectator." She was a little confused about where the exit was. I was just helping her out. She looked at me. Her eyes were hard. "Weren't you, Evelyn? You were just leaving." I looked at Tiffany. I adjusted my coat. "I know exactly where I am going," I said. Tiffany rolled her eyes and turned back to Marcus. So sorry about that. Please don't let this distraction keep you from the display. I'm ready for you whenever you are. She turned and strutted back to her white gravel platform. She posed next to the orchids, waiting. I watched her go. I took a breath. The air smelled of her strong floral perfume and the damp earth from the neighboring stall. Next to Tiffany's extravagant display was a small 10 by 10 booth. It had no white gravel. It had no velvet ropes. It was a simple display of native succulents and soil layering. A young man, no older than 20, stood there. He wore a stained apron and looked terrified. He was misting a small tray of seedlings. I looked at his hands. They were dirty. Real dirt. Not bagged potting soil, but the dark, rich earth of a compost pile. I opened my folder again. I looked at the scorecard for Tiffany Rosewood. I looked at the blank lines waiting for my comments. Shall we? I said to Marcus. After you, he said. I stepped forward, leading the group toward the white gravel. We stood in a semicircle around the front of the modern minimalist Zen paradise. The crowd pressed in behind us. I could feel the heat from hundreds of bodies. People stood on their toes to get a better look. Tiffany did not look at me. She looked at Marcus. She smoothed the front of her white dress and clasped her hands in front of her waist. She tilted her head to the side, posing. Welcome, she said. Her voice projected well. She had practiced this. I invited you all to experience serenity. The concept here is the intersection of nature and discipline. Marcus didn't answer. He looked at his clipboard. Then the speakers above us crackled. A high-pitched feedback whine made everyone wince. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed through the hall. It echoed off the metal ceiling. May I have your attention for the center ring? It is time for the final adjudication of the Golden Trowel Award. The crowd grew quiet. The murmur of conversation died down until I could hear the hum of the refrigerator units in the snack bar 50 feet away. Please welcome the president of the society to introduce this year's head judge, the announcer said. A man in a blue blazer walked out from the side of the stage. He carried a velvet box and a folded piece of green satin. He walked straight toward our group. Tiffany looked confused. She glanced at the man, then at Marcus. She smiled nervously. Is this part of the inspection? She asked. The man in the blue blazer did not answer her. He stopped in front of me. I unbuttoned my gray wool coat. The buttons were large and slipped easily through the holes. I shrugged the coat off my shoulders. The steward behind me stepped forward and took it from my hands. I stood there in my navy dress. I reached into my purse and took out my reading glasses. I unfolded the arms and slid them onto my nose. The man in the blue blazer bowed his head slightly. He held out the green satin sash. I took it. I placed the sash over my right shoulder. It draped across my chest and pinned at my left hip. The gold letters caught the overhead lights. Head judge. I smoothed the fabric with my hand. I looked up. The silence in the hall was heavy. Tiffany was staring at my chest. Her eyes were locked on the gold letters. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. Her hands dropped to her sides. The confident posture vanished. Her shoulders slumped forward. She looked up at my face. Her eyes were wide. I saw the pupils dilate. She blinked once, twice, as if trying to clear a blurry image. Evelyn, she whispered. Her voice was barely a breath. I did not smile. I did not frown. I adjusted the clipboard in my hand. The head judge is ready, I said to the man in the blue blazer. He stepped back. I turned to face the display. I looked at the velvet rope that separated the white gravel from the concrete floor. I stepped over the rope. My shoe landed on the white gravel. Crunch. The sound was loud in the quiet hall. I took another step. Crunch. Crunch. I walked up the slight incline of the platform. I stood next to the black planters. I was now on the stage with her. Tiffany backed away. She took one step back, her heel catching on a stone. She stumbled slightly but caught her balance. Mom, she said. The word slipped out. She wasn't speaking to the audience anymore. She wasn't speaking to her followers. She was speaking to the woman she had left on the porch. I didn't answer her. I wasn't her mother-in-law right now. I was the judge. I took a pen from my pocket. I clicked the top. The sound was sharp. Entry number 85, I said aloud. My voice was steady. Category: Modern Ornamental. Marcus and the other judges stood behind the rope, writing down my words. I walked to the first planter. The bamboo stalks were thick and green. I reached out and tapped one with my fingernail. It made a hollow, dull thud. Bamboo appears healthy, I said. Spacing is adequate. I moved to the orchids. Tiffany watched me. She looked pale. Her makeup stood out in stark contrast to her skin. She looked at the crowd, then back at me. She raised her hand slightly as if to stop me, then dropped it again. "Evelyn, wait," she hissed. She leaned in close to me. "What are you doing? Take that off. You can't be the judge. You're Q." I ignored her. I leaned in close to the white orchid. I looked at the stem where it met the soil. There was no moss packing. There was no aerial root system visible. I touched the petal. It was cool and stiff. I looked at Tiffany. "The lighting is very aggressive," I said to the group. "It generates significant heat." "It's for the photos," Tiffany said. Her voice shook. "It makes the white pop." "Heat is detrimental to Phalaenopsis orchids," I said. "They prefer indirect, cool environments." I looked deeper into the pot. I saw the wire. It was green, painted to blend in with the stem, but the paint had chipped near the base. I looked at Tiffany. She stopped breathing for a second. She knew what I saw. I straightened up. I looked at the crowd. Hundreds of faces looked back at me. I saw a phone camera pointed right at us. "Please proceed with the inspection of the backdrop," I said to the scribes. I turned my back on Tiffany and walked toward the wall of green leaves. I stood in front of the green wall. The leaves were dark and tightly packed. They completely covered the wooden frame behind them. From a distance, it looked like a solid block of emerald green. Up close, I saw the dust settled in the crevices where the leaves met the stems. I reached out and took hold of a vine near the bottom. The stem was woody and tough. I twisted it to see the underside of the leaf. The veins were pale yellow, creating a web pattern against the dark green. The shape was distinct, 3 lobes like a bird's footprint. "Is there a problem?" Tiffany asked. Her voice was tight. She stood right behind me now, blocking the view of the camera. "This is heterohelix," I said. I let go of the vine. It sprang back into place against the wood. "English ivy." Tiffany forced a laugh. It sounded brittle. "It's just greenery, Evelyn. It's filler. It highlights the white of the stones." I turned to face her. I kept my hands clasped behind my back. "It is a Class C invasive species in the state of California," I said. "It chokes native oak trees. It harbors bacterial leaf scorch. Rule number 9 of the exhibition guidelines states that no invasive plant material is permitted in the hall." Tiffany's eyes darted to the judges standing at the edge of the platform. Marcus was writing on his clipboard. It's sterile," she stammered. "I bought it from a catalog. It doesn't have berries. It's fine." "The rule refers to the species, not the reproductive state," I said. I walked back to the center planters. I looked at the tall white orchids again. They were the centerpiece of her design. They stood perfectly straight, without the slight, natural curve that real stems have as they reach for the light. I had noticed the texture earlier. Now I needed to be sure. I reached into the black pot. My fingers brushed the moss covering the soil. It was dry. Bone dry. I grasped the stem of the tallest bloom. "Don't," Tiffany whispered. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out to stop me. "Don't touch it." I applied pressure with my thumb and forefinger. Snap. The sound was sharp and metallic. It echoed in the silence of the hall. I pulled the top half of the flower away. A thin silver wire stuck out from the bottom of the stem. A matching wire poked up from the base in the pot. The fabric of the petals frayed slightly where the wire had torn through the plastic coating. I held the broken flower up. The crowd gasped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. "Silk," I said. I turned the flower so the judges could see the wire. "High quality. But silk." Tiffany froze. Her face turned a blotchy red. She looked at the broken flower in my hand, then at the camera, then at the floor. She crossed her arms over her chest, hiding her hands. "It was for the aesthetic," she said. Her voice was small now. The projection was gone. "Real flowers wilt. The lights are too hot. I needed them to look perfect for the whole week." I placed the fake flower gently on the white gravel. It lay there, a piece of plastic trash on the pristine stones. "This is a horticulture competition, Tiffany," I said. "We judge the cultivation of living things. We do not judge manufacturing." I took the clipboard from Marcus. I took the red pen from my pocket. I looked at the scorecard. I drew a single thick line diagonally across the page. "Violation of Rule 4. Artificial enhancements," I said aloud. "Violation of Rule 9. Invasive species." I wrote the word disqualified in block letters at the bottom of the page. I handed the clipboard back to Marcus. I didn't look at Tiffany's face. I looked at her shoes. She was shifting her weight from foot to foot, unbalancing the gravel she had carefully raked. "Please clear the display," I said to the stewards. I turned around and walked down the ramp. My shoes hit the concrete floor again. Felt solid and real. I took a deep breath. The air still smelled of mulch and coffee, but now I could also smell the faint sweet scent of the sage from the booth next door. I turned my back on the white gravel. I could hear the murmurs of the crowd behind me. They were loud and excited the way people get when they see a car crash. I heard the clack 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 of Tiffany's heels retreating off the platform, followed by the hushed tones of her arguing with her photographer. I didn't look back. I looked forward. Directly next to Tiffany's empty spectacle was entry 86. It was a small booth only 10 feet wide. There were no velvet ropes. There were no spotlights generating heat. There was just a table made of reclaimed barnwood and a backdrop of simple unbleached burlap. The young man I had seen earlier stood behind the table. He was wiping his hands on his apron. He looked terrified. He had watched me snap the neck of his neighbor's orchid, and now the head judge was walking straight toward him. He took a half-step back, bumping into his own display table. A small clay pot wobbled, but he caught it just in time. I didn't use any wires, ma'am," he stammered. His voice cracked. He looked to be about 19 years old. His fingernails were rimmed with black dirt. I stopped at the edge of his booth. I clasped my hands in front of my sash. "Good," I said. I looked at his display. It was a collection of Dudleya, a native succulent that grows on the coastal cliffs of California. They weren't flashy. They looked like chalky pale green stars growing out of rocks. To the untrained eye, they looked like weeds you might find on a hike. But I wasn't an untrained eye. I leaned in. The plants were positioned at an angle, mimicking how they grew on a cliff face to prevent rot in the center of the rosette. The pots were not plastic or glazed ceramic. They were rough, porous terracotta that allowed the roots to breathe. "What is your name, young man?" I asked. "Leo," he said. He swallowed hard. "Leo Miller." "Leo," I repeated. I pointed to the largest plant in the center. It was a Dudleya Bretonii. The leaves were covered in a thick white powder. "Tell me about this specimen." Leo blinked. He looked at the plant and his shoulders dropped an inch. The tension left his face, replaced by focus. "That's the giant chalk Dudleya," he said. "It's about 5 years old. I grew it from seed." "From seed?" Marcus asked from behind me. He stepped up, his pen hovering over his clipboard. "That is a slow process." "Yes, sir," Leo said. He reached out and hovered his hand near the leaves, but he didn't touch them. "You can't touch the leaves. The oils from your skin ruin the white farina powder. It acts as a sunscreen for the plant. If you wipe it off, it burns." I nodded. "Correct." I looked at Tiffany's display again out of the corner of my eye. She had touched her orchids constantly. She had let the photographer lean on the bamboo. She treated plants like props. Leo treated them like living things. I reached for a small handful of the soil mix in the pot. It was loose and gritty. I rubbed it between my thumb and forefinger. It felt sharp. "Pumice," I said. "Granite grit. Very little organic matter." Leo nodded eagerly. "Yes, ma'am. It's an 80-20 mix. If the soil is too rich, they grow too fast and get weak. They need to struggle a little to be strong. That's how they survive the cliffs. They need to struggle a little to be strong." I wiped the grit from my fingers onto a handkerchief. I looked at Leo. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at his plant, checking for a piece of lint on the pot. I turned to the man in the blue blazer, the society president. He was standing with a box of ribbons, looking unsure of what to do after the scene at the previous booth. "Mr. President," I said. "The rosette, please." He fumbled with the box and pulled out a large ribbon. It was made of thick, pleated gold satin. The center button was embossed with the image of a trowel. The crowd went silent again. They pressed in closer. I took the ribbon. It felt heavy in my hand. I turned back to Leo. He froze. He looked at the ribbon, then at me, then at his dirty apron. "For the native specimen category," I announced, my voice clear. "And for the best in show distinction." Leo's mouth fell open. "Best in show? But I just have succulents. I don't have a fountain. I don't have lights." "You have horticulture," I said. "You understand the life of the plant. You prioritize the health of the root system over the color of the pot." I stepped forward and pinned the gold rosette to the burlap backdrop, right above the chalky white Deadlia. "Congratulations, Leo," I said. The crowd applauded. It started as a polite golf clap, but then it grew. People cheered. They liked an underdog. They liked seeing the boy with the dirty hands win over the influencer with the plastic flowers. I saw a flash of white in the crowd. Tiffany was standing near the exit. She had her phone to her ear, arguing loudly. She glared at me, then at Leo. She turned on her heel and pushed through the double doors, disappearing into the bright sunlight of the parking lot. I looked back at Leo. He was staring at the ribbon. He reached out and touched the gold satin, his dirty finger leaving a tiny smudge on the fabric. He smiled. It was a real smile. It reached his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "I didn't think anyone would notice the soil." "A gardener always notices the soil," I said. I closed my folder. The judging was done. The tension in my shoulders released. "Tell me, Leo," I said, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "I have a California lilac at home that is struggling with drainage. Do you have any experience with ceanothus?" He nodded enthusiastically. "Oh yes. My grandma has a huge one. You have to be careful with summer water. If you water it when the ground is hot, you boil the roots." "Exactly," I said. "I would love to hear your thoughts on grafting." I gestured toward the judge's break room. "Would you care to join us for tea? I believe there are some sandwiches left." Leo untied his apron. He looked at the gold ribbon one last time, then nodded. "I'd like that very much, ma'am." We walked away from the booth together. I left the noise and the cameras behind. We walked toward the quiet room where the coffee was stale but the conversation would be real. The sun was setting by the time I pulled my sedan into the driveway. The sky was a bruised purple over the ocean, and the light hit the tops of my eucalyptus trees, turning the leaves a dusty gold. I turned off the engine. The silence of the car felt heavy after the noise of the convention hall. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My hands were steady. I grabbed my purse and the garment bag containing my navy dress. I walked up the path to the front door. To my left, the wild sagebrush brushed against my leg. It released a sharp, peppery scent. I didn't pull away. I let the plant touch me. Inside, the house was cool. The red light on my landline phone was blinking rapidly. Blink, blink, blink. 12 new messages. I walked past the phone. I didn't press play. I went into the kitchen and filled the kettle with water. I set it on the stove and turned the dial. The blue flame clicked on. I went to the bedroom and changed. I hung the navy dress in the back of the closet. I took off the sensible heels and put on my worn leather slippers. I put on a soft cardigan. I was Evelyn again. I heard a car door slam outside. It wasn't the sharp, expensive thud of Tiffany's SUV. It was the heavier, duller sound of a sedan. I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain. My son Mark was walking up the driveway. He wore his work suit, but the tie was loosened, and his top button was undone. He looked tired. He carried a white paper box from a bakery. I opened the front door before he knocked. "Hi, Mom," he said. He didn't look at my face. He looked at the doormat. "Hello, Mark," I said. I stepped back to let him in. He walked into the living room and set the bakery box on the coffee table. The smell of yeast and sugar filled the room. "I brought bear claws," he said. "I know they're your favorite." "Thank you," I said. "The water is boiling. I'll make tea." We sat in the living room a few minutes later. The tea steamed in the mugs. Mark held his mug with both hands, staring into the dark liquid. Tiffany is at her mother's house, he said quietly. She didn't want to come home. She said she couldn't face the neighbors. I took a sip of tea. It was hot and soothing. She was disqualified, Mark. It happens. Mark looked up at me then. He rubbed a hand over his face. The sound of his stubble scratching against his palm was loud in the quiet room. I saw the video, Mom, he said. Someone streamed it on Facebook. It has 50,000 views already. He paused. He took a breath. I saw the wire, he said. I nodded. Yes. It was very clearly visible. Mark shook his head. She told me she grew them. She told me she spent 6 months in the greenhouse with those orchids. I paid the heating bill for that greenhouse. It was enormous. He looked out the window at my garden. The shadows were long now, stretching across the lawn. She called your garden a dump, Mark said. She told me we needed to hire a crew to rip it all out while you were at the show. She wanted to surprise you. My grip on the mug tightened. The ceramic felt hard against my knuckles. I see. I told her no, Mark said. He looked back at me. His eyes were serious. I told her that Dad planted that lemon tree in the back. I told her you spend every morning out here. He reached for a pastry but didn't pick it up. He just touched the edge of the box. I didn't know you were the head judge, he said. Why didn't you tell us? Because a judge must be impartial, I said. And because I wanted to see what she would do when she thought no one was watching. Mark nodded slowly. He understood. She's talking about suing the Flower Society, he said with a dry chuckle. For emotional distress. But I told her to drop it. I told her she cheated and she got caught. He stood up and walked to the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. He unlocked it and slid it open. The cool evening breeze drifted in. I missed the tomatoes, he said unexpectedly. I looked at his back. The tomatoes? Yeah, he said. When I was a kid, you used to grow those early girls along the fence. I used to eat them right off the vine. They tasted like sunshine and dirt. He turned around. Tiffany doesn't let me plant vegetables. She says they look messy. I stood up and walked over to him. I put a hand on his shoulder. The fabric of his suit was smooth. There is plenty of space here, Mark, I said. The soil in the south corner is very rich. It would be perfect for tomatoes. He smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was genuine. Maybe I'll come by this weekend. I can help you weed the beds. Bring the boys. I would like that, I said. But we don't pull the milkweed. And we don't pull the clover. I know, Mom, he said. It's habitat. Mark stayed for another hour. We ate the pastries and drank the tea. We didn't talk about Tiffany again. We talked about the boys' soccer games. We talked about the leak in his roof. We talked about real things. When he left, the house felt peaceful. I washed the mugs in the sink. The warm water ran over my hands. I dried them on a towel and walked out the back door into the garden. It was dark now. The motion sensor light clicked on, flooding the yard with a pale white light. I walked over to the flower bed Tiffany had mocked. The milkweed stalk stood tall and stiff. The leaves were chewed and ragged. To a minimalist, it looked broken. I crouched down. My knees popped, but it didn't hurt. I lifted a leaf gently. Underneath, attached by a tiny silken thread, hung a chrysalis. It was jade green with a line of gold dots near the top. It was fragile and beautiful. Inside, the caterpillar was dissolving, rebuilding itself into something new. It wasn't pretty right now. It was doing the work. I stood up and brushed the dirt from my skirt. I looked at the empty space where I would plant the tomatoes with my son next week. I thought about Leo and his succulents. I thought about the wire in the orchid. Excellence cannot be faked. It has to be grown. I reached out and snapped a dead head off a geranium. The smell of the broken stem was sharp and green. I tossed the dead flower onto the compost pile. It would rot. It would become soil. It would feed the garden next year. I turned off the porch light and went inside. The garden continued to grow in the dark. The end.